The council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal floors and towering walls that displayed the homeworlds of 47 different species. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood at the human podium with his hands clasped behind his back and his jaw set tight. He had been preparing for this moment for 6 months, but the weight of what he was about to do still pressed down on his shoulders like a physical thing. Behind him sat Lisa Hayes in her crisp military uniform, and her fingers drummed once against her datapad before going still. She knew what was coming, and she had tried to talk him out of it 3 times during the flight to Nexus. Prime, the chamber buzzed with the translated voices of hundreds of delegates. The Varaxian representative Krelix sat in his elevated seat with his scaled face, showing something that might have been amusement or contempt. It was hard to tell with Varaxians. Their faces did not move the way human faces did. His black eyes watched Jake with the same intensity a predator might watch wounded prey. To his left sat the floating form of Thorinine, who served as the council mediator. Her synthetic body hummed softly as her processors worked through the 17 different languages being spoken. Simultaneously in the room, Jake had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 8 years. He had seen the best and worst of what the galaxy had to offer. He had negotiated trade deals that brought prosperity to dozens of worlds. He had helped draft treaties that prevented wars. He had truly believed that humanity's place was here among the stars, working alongside other species to build something greater than any single civilization could achieve alone. That belief had died 3 weeks ago on a colony world called New Seattle. New Seattle had been home to 40,000 humans. They were farmers and engineers and teachers building a life on a world that the council charts said was unclaimed. The colony had been there for 5 years. Children had been born there. People had built homes and schools and parks. Then the Varaxian Empire decided that the planet fell within their historical territorial claims. Historical claims that went back 3,000 years to a war that no one else remembered or cared about. The Varaxians did not send a warning. They did not file a complaint with the council. They sent warships. The attack lasted for hours. When it was over 38,000 people were dead, the survivors had been rescued by a human cargo ship that happened to be passing through the system. The captain had broadcast everything. The galaxy had watched the Varaxian ships burn the colony from orbit. They had watched residential districts turn to ash. They had watched escape pods being shot down. They had watched it all, and now Jake was here to show them what their inaction meant. He activated his datapad and the chamber's main display flickered to life. Images filled the screens. Burned buildings and scorched earth and bodies that had been recovered from the wreckage. The chamber went quiet. Even the constant buzz of translation software seemed to fade. Jake let the images speak for themselves for a full minute before he began. His voice was steady. He had practiced this speech until the words felt like stones in his mouth, but he would not let emotion crack his composure. Not here, not now. He explained that Earth had brought formal charges against the Varaxian Empire for genocide and violation of council law. He presented evidence of the attack. He showed communications proving the Varaxians had known the colony was inhabited. He showed everything, and when he finished, he stood silent and waited for justice. The council deliberated for 2 hours. Jake sat in the human delegation box with Lisa beside him and watched the representatives argue. Some species called for sanctions. Others defended the Varaxians. The Keltharian delegates stood and gave a passionate speech about the sanctity of life. The Polix representative countered that territorial disputes were complex and perhaps humans should have researched Varaxian claims more thoroughly before settling. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest as he listened. When the vote came, it was not even close. 41 species voted to take no action. 3 abstained. Only 2 voted in favor of sanctions, and one of those was humanity itself. The other was a small species called the Yanari, who had always been friendly to Earth, but whose vote carried almost no weight in council politics. Krelix stood to address the chamber. His translated voice came through calm and almost regretful. He explained that the Varaxian Empire valued its relationship with humanity. The incident at New Seattle was unfortunate, but humans had been warned through proper diplomatic channels about settling in disputed territories. The fact that those warnings had never actually been sent was beside the point. The Varaxian Empire could not be expected to compromise its security for the sake of one small colony. Surely humanity understood. Surely humanity could see reason. Jake stood slowly. Lisa put a hand on his arm, but he shook it off gently. He walked back to the podium, and every eye in the chamber followed him. He had not requested to speak again, but no one stopped him. Perhaps they thought he would apologize. Perhaps they thought he would beg. Perhaps they thought humans would do what humans always did and accept the decision. And move on, because that was how the council worked. Jake looked across the chamber at the faces of species humanity had fought, beside and traded with, and trusted. He looked at Krellix, who watched him with those cold, black eyes. He looked at Thorinine, whose synthetic face showed no expression at all. Then he spoke, and his voice carried to every corner of that massive room. He said that humanity had come to the stars, believing in something greater. They had believed in cooperation and justice, and the idea that civilization meant protecting the weak and holding the powerful accountable. They had believed the council represented those ideals. They had been wrong. The council was not interested in justice. It was interested in maintaining power. It was interested in protecting its founding members, regardless of what crimes they committed. It was interested in everything except doing what was right. Jake said that Earth had not come to the council to beg. Earth had come to give notice. Effective immediately, humanity was withdrawing from the Galactic Council. All treaties were void. All trade agreements were terminated. All human personnel would be recalled from council facilities within 72 hours. Humanity wanted nothing more to do with a government that would watch children burn and call it politics. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted in a dozen languages. Thorinine's voice cut through the chaos, calling for order. Krellix was laughing. Actually laughing. His translator rendered it as a harsh, barking sound. He said something about humans being emotional and rash. He said they would be back within a month begging for readmission. He said humanity needed the council far more than the council needed humanity. Jake gathered his things. Lisa was already standing. They walked toward the exit, while the chamber descended into chaos behind them. No one tried to stop them. Perhaps they still thought it was a bluff. Perhaps they thought humans would cool down and reconsider. Perhaps they simply did not care. As the doors closed behind them, Jake heard Krellix's voice one last time. The Varaxian was addressing the council, and his tone was dismissive. He said that humanity's departure would be a minor inconvenience at worst. The council had existed for 10,000 years. It would endure. Humanity would learn its place. Jake smiled for the first time in 3 weeks. It was not a kind smile. Lisa saw it and knew immediately that the galaxy had just made the biggest mistake in its long history. Humanity was leaving, and they had no idea what that truly meant. They would learn soon enough. The first sign that something was wrong came 6 hours after Jake Morrison walked out of the council chamber. A Keltharian medical facility on the Outer Rim sent an urgent message to their supply coordinator, asking why their weekly shipment of synthetic antibiotics had been canceled. The coordinator checked the records and found that the manufacturer was a human company based on Mars. The company had terminated all contracts with council species exactly 3 hours after humanity's withdrawal announcement. The Keltharians had enough medicine to last maybe 2 weeks. After that, people would start dying from infections that had been trivial to treat for the past decade. That same morning, the Polix Federation discovered that their entire jump gate network had gone dark. The quantum processors that regulated faster-than-light travel between star systems were built by human engineers and maintained by human technicians. Every single human worker had received recall orders. They had packed their equipment and left without explaining how to keep the systems running. The Pollocs had their own engineers, of course, but jump gate technology was incredibly complex. It would take months to train replacements, and in the meantime, 37 star systems were cut off from each other. Trade ground to a halt. Food shipments stopped. Passenger ships floated in empty space, unable to make the calculations needed to jump. Captain Ryan Cole stood on the bridge of the UHN's Defiant and watched the chaos unfold on his sensor displays. His ship was 3 days out from Council's space escorting a convoy of human, civilian vessels back to Earth. There were cargo ships and passenger liners, and even a few private yachts. All of them had received the same order to evacuate immediately. Ryan was 32 years old and had been commanding the Defiant for 2 years. He was good at his job, and his crew trusted him completely. The sensor officer called out a contact. Ryan looked at the display and felt his jaw tighten. 6 Varaxian warships had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly in the convoy's path. They were not bothering to hide their weapon signatures. Ryan ordered the civilian ships to hold position and move the Defiant forward. His communications officer hailed the Varaxian vessels, but received no response. That was answer enough. The lead Varaxian ship opened fire without warning. Plasma bolts streaked across the void toward a human cargo vessel carrying reactor cores and medical supplies. The Defiant's point defense systems lit up and intercepted most of the shots, but 2 got through. The cargo ship's shields flickered and held. Barely. Ryan gave the order to return fire, and the Defiant's weapons came online. The battle lasted exactly 11 minutes. The Varaxians fought the way they always had, with frontal assaults and overwhelming firepower. They expected humans to follow Council rules of engagement. They expected warning shots, inhaling attempts, and measured responses. Instead, the Defiant hit them with everything at once. Electronic warfare packages scrambled their targeting systems. Kinetic railguns punched through their energy shields like they were not even there. False surrender beacons drew 2 Varaxian ships out of formation where the Defiant's missile pods were waiting. When it was over, all 6 Varaxian ships were destroyed. The Defiant had taken minor damage to its forward shields. Ryan ordered his crew to scan for survivors, and they found none. Varaxian ships did not carry many escape pods. Their culture considered retreat dishonorable. Ryan felt nothing as he watched the wreckage tumble through space. These were the same people who had burned New Seattle. The same people who laughed when Jake Morrison showed images of dead children. If they wanted a fight, humanity would give them one. The battle footage was transmitted to every human ship in the fleet. From there, it spread to Earth and then to the galactic networks. Within 48 hours, every species in the galaxy had seen what happened when you attacked humans, who were no longer bound by Council rules. The footage showed tactics that Council military doctrine considered dishonorable or outright illegal. It showed a human ship using electronic warfare to disable enemies before they could fight back. It showed kinetic weapons that Council treaties had banned for being too destructive. It showed humans fighting to win rather than fighting to look good. The Council convened an emergency session to condemn humanity's actions. They called the battle a massacre. They said humans had violated the rules of civilized warfare. They seemed to forget that the Varaxians had fired first, and that Council rules no longer applied to a species that was not part of the Council. The condemnation was voted through by a narrow margin. 23 species voted yes. 18 voted no. 6 abstained. The cracks were already showing. Back on Earth, President Helen Carter addressed the planet in a broadcast that was transmitted to every human colony and station. She was 58 years old with gray hair and a face that showed every year she had spent in politics. She had been president for 6 years and had spent the last 2 quietly preparing for this exact scenario. She stood at a podium in front of the combined flags of Earth's nations and spoke in a calm, clear voice. She explained that humanity's departure from the Council was not a rash decision made in anger. It was the culmination of years of planning and preparation. The Council had shown time and again that it did not value human lives or human interests. Every proposal Earth made for better trade terms was voted down. Every request for defensive support was ignored. Every human colony that faced threats was told to handle it themselves. The Council took humanity's contributions and gave nothing back. That arrangement was over. Helen said that humanity did not need the Council. For the past 3 years, human corporations had been quietly building alternative trade networks. Human banks had been reducing their exposure to Council currencies. Human military forces had been developing weapons and tactics that did not rely on Council technology. Humanity had allies now. Real allies who shared common values. The Terran coalition was already forming with species who understood that respect was a two-way street. She said that any council species that wished to maintain peaceful relations with humanity was welcome to do so. Trade agreements could be negotiated on fair terms. Mutual defense pacts could be signed between equals. But humanity would never again bow to a government that treated them as second-class citizens. The council could accept that, or they could learn the hard way. That humans were not as dependent as everyone thought. The speech lasted 12 minutes. When it ended, the galactic stock markets went into freefall. Human banks began recalling loans worth trillions of credits. Corporations like Chinhao Industries withdrew from joint ventures and took their patents with them. Manufacturing worlds that depended on human raw materials suddenly found their supply chains severed. The Keltharian Combine discovered that 60% of their medical supplies came from human manufacturers. The Polix Federation realized their jump gates were useless without human maintenance. The Orathan clans found that their purchased weapon systems had remote kill switches that human engineers had just activated. Zeph was the trade minister for the Keltharian Combine, and he had been in his position for 20 years. He was considered one of the finest economic minds in the galaxy. He had negotiated treaties that enriched his people and strengthened their position. Now he sat in his office and stared at reports that showed his entire economy collapsing. The humans were not even trying to hurt the Keltharians specifically. They were simply leaving and taking everything they had built with them. Zeph tried to contact human trade representatives, but every message went unanswered. He tried to route through back channels and old friendships, but the humans were not interested in talking. Their position was simple and had been stated clearly. They were done with the council and everything associated with it. If the Keltharians wanted to do business, they would need to approach Earth directly as an independent party. They would need to negotiate new terms. They would need to prove they were worth humanity's time. The council held another emergency session. This one was not about condemnation. This one was about survival. Species after species stood and reported the damage. Manufacturing shutdowns, supply shortages, medical crises, communication breakdowns. The council had always known humans were important, but no one had realized just how deeply human technology and human expertise had woven itself into galactic civilization. It had happened gradually over 20 years. Human doctors trained alien physicians. Human engineers designed infrastructure. Human corporations provided everything from weapons to medical equipment to entertainment. Now, it was all gone, and the galaxy was realizing that they had built there prosperity on a foundation they did not control and did not understand. Krellick sat in his seat and said nothing. His earlier confidence had evaporated. The Vraxian Empire was powerful, but even they relied on human technology in a dozen critical areas. His government was already sending him urgent messages demanding he fix this situation. He had no idea how Thora-9 calculated probabilities and ran simulations. Every scenario came back the same. The Council needed humanity more than humanity needed the Council. The balance of power had shifted, and no one had noticed until it was too late. She began drafting proposals for reconciliation, but even her advanced processors could not find terms that would satisfy both sides. Humanity wanted respect and equality. The Council wanted control and hierarchy. Those positions were fundamentally incompatible. 3 days after humanity's departure, the first refugees started arriving at Council stations. They were humans who had married aliens or built lives on Council worlds. They came with stories of harassment and violence. Some Council species were taking out their anger on any human they could find. Others were trying to hold human citizens hostage to force Earth to negotiate. Ryan Cole's fleet added refugee rescue to their mission list. They began pulling humans out of dangerous situations, and the Council could do nothing to stop them. The galaxy was changing and changing fast. The old order was crumbling, and no one knew what would replace it. 2 months after humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, the true scale of the disaster became impossible to ignore. The galactic economy was not just struggling anymore. It was in complete freefall. Stock markets that had been stable for centuries crashed so hard that trading had to be suspended on 40 different worlds. Banks that had existed for thousands of years suddenly found themselves unable to meet withdrawal demands. Factories went silent. Supply chains collapsed. Worlds that had known nothing but prosperity for generations were now facing shortages of basic necessities. Danny Price sat in the engineering bay of Epsilon Base and watched his alien coworkers panic. The station orbited a gas giant on the edge of Council space and served as a refueling point for ships traveling to the Outer Rim. It was home to about 8,000 people from a dozen different species. Danny was the only human. He was 34 years old and had been working at Epsilon Base for 6 years. He had friends here. Good friends. People he had shared meals with and laughed with and trusted with his life. Now he was leaving and they were terrified. The station's fusion reactors were failing. Not catastrophically, but steadily declining in efficiency. The replacement parts they needed were manufactured by a human company on Titan. Danny had filed the order 3 months ago, but it had been canceled when humanity withdrew. The base commander had tried to source the parts elsewhere, but no other species made components that were compatible with human-designed reactors. They had maybe 4 weeks before the reactors dropped below critical efficiency levels. After that, life support would begin failing. Danny had received his evacuation orders yesterday. A human transport ship would arrive in 6 hours to pick him up. He was supposed to pack his things and leave. Those were his orders, and Danny had always followed orders. But he kept thinking about what would happen after he left. The station's other engineers were good at their jobs, but they did not understand human fusion technology. They had never needed to. Danny had always been there to handle the complex systems. Now he would be gone, and 8,000 people would die because no one else knew how to keep the lights on. He made his decision. He sent a message to the transport ship explaining that he would not be evacuating. Then he gathered the station's engineering team in the reactor control room. There were 5 of them. A Keltharian named Voss, who had worked with Danny for 4 years. 2 Pollux engineers, who were young but talented. A Xanthari maintenance specialist who was old enough to have grandchildren. An Orothan mechanic, who never spoke much, but could fix anything with moving parts. They all looked at Danny with a mixture of hope and fear. Danny spent the next 3 days teaching them everything he knew about the reactor systems. He showed them diagnostic procedures and bypass protocols. He explained the safety margins and what warnings to watch for. He walked them through every scenario he could think of and made them practice until they could handle basic problems without his help. It was not enough. 3 days could not replace 6 years of experience. But it was better than nothing. The human transport ship arrived right on schedule. The captain sent increasingly urgent messages demanding that Danny board immediately. Danny ignored them. The ship waited for 4 hours, and then left without him. Danny knew he would face consequences for disobeying orders. He did not care. He sent a message to Earth Command explaining his decision and waited for their response. What he got was not what he expected. The response came from someone high up in the military chain of command. They told him that while they understood his motivations, he had made his choice and would have to live with it. Earth could not protect him anymore. He was on his own. If the Council decided to arrest him, or worse, there would be no rescue mission. He had chosen aliens over his own people, and he would face whatever consequences came from that choice. Danny read the message 3 times. Then he deleted it and went back to work. He had made his choice, and he would stand by it. The Keltharian commander offered him a position as chief engineer with double his previous salary. Danny accepted. He figured if he was going to be stuck here, he might as well get paid properly. While Danny was trying to save one station, the Galactic Council was desperately trying to save their entire civilization. They had finally accepted that humanity was not coming back. The question now was how to survive without them. They formed committees and task forces. They hired consultants and analysts. They spent billions of credits studying the problem from every angle. The answer was always the same. The Council had become dependent on human innovation and human expertise. Replacing that would take decades and resources they did not have. Elder Morthus was chosen to lead a delegation to Earth. He was Zenthari, and his species had a reputation for wisdom and diplomacy. He had negotiated peace treaties that ended wars spanning centuries. He had mediated disputes between species that hated each other. If anyone could convince humanity to return, it would be him. The Council gave him broad authority to offer whatever concessions were necessary. Better trade terms. Guaranteed security. Even a permanent seat on the Council leadership. Anything to bring humans back into the fold. The journey to Earth took 2 weeks. Morthus spent that time preparing his arguments and reviewing human psychology reports. He knew humans valued fairness and honor. He knew they responded well to appeals to their better nature. He crafted a speech that acknowledged past mistakes and promised a better future. He was confident that he could find common ground. The ship entered Earth's solar system and was immediately surrounded by human military vessels. They were escorted to a station orbiting the moon. Morthus was received with all due courtesy. His delegation was given comfortable quarters and excellent food. They were treated as honored guests. That was a good sign. The next morning, Morthus was taken to meet Ambassador Kelly White. She was younger than he expected. Maybe 40 years old with dark hair and sharp eyes. She greeted him warmly and offered refreshments. They made small talk about the journey and the weather. Everything was perfectly polite and professional. Then they got down to business. Morthus gave his speech. He talked about the long friendship between the Council and humanity. He acknowledged that mistakes had been made. He expressed deep regret over the New Seattle tragedy. He explained that the Council had learned from its errors and was committed to reform. He offered humanity better terms than any species had ever received. A permanent leadership position, control over military operations, favorable trade agreements, technology-sharing partnerships. Everything was on the table. Kelly listened politely. She took notes. She asked a few clarifying questions. When Morthus finished, she thanked him for his time and honesty. Then she said no. Morthus was confused. He asked if the terms were insufficient. Kelly said the terms were generous. He asked if humanity wanted something more. Kelly said humanity wanted nothing from the Council. He asked what it would take to bring humanity back. Kelly smiled sadly and explained that there was nothing the Council could offer because humanity did not want to return. She told him that humans had moved on. They had built new partnerships and new trade networks. The Terran coalition was growing every week. Species who valued fairness and mutual respect were joining. Species who understood that alliances should benefit everyone involved. The Council represented everything humanity was trying to get away from: hierarchy, favoritism, rules that protected the powerful and punished the weak. Why would humanity return to that? Morthus tried different approaches. He appealed to human compassion. Surely they could see that ordinary Council citizens were suffering. Kelly agreed that was unfortunate, but pointed out that those citizens had not objected when humans were suffering. He appealed to human pragmatism. The Council could be reformed from within. Kelly laughed and asked how many centuries that would take. He appealed to human pride. Did they not want a seat at the biggest table in the galaxy? Kelly said humans were building their own table. The meeting lasted 3 hours. At the end, Morthus had nothing to show for it. Kelly escorted him back to his ship personally. She was kind about it. She wished him well. She said that any Council species that wanted peaceful relations with humanity could negotiate directly with Earth. Fair terms for fair partners. But the Council as an institution had burned that bridge, and there was no rebuilding it. Morthus returned to Nexus Prime and reported his failure. The Council chamber was silent as he explained that humanity could not be bought or bargained with. They had made their decision based on principle, and no amount of concessions would change their minds. Some delegates refused to believe it. Others grew angry. A few seemed to understand that they had created this situation themselves. The Varaxian representative, Krellick, suggested using military force to bring humanity back in line. That suggestion was voted down immediately. Every species had seen what happened to the Varaxian battle group that attacked human civilians. No one wanted to face the full might of the human military. Besides, the Council could barely maintain order in their own territories. They did not have the resources for a war with a species that was clearly prepared to fight. The Council was out of options. They had always assumed that humans needed them more than they needed humans. They had been catastrophically wrong. Now they were watching their civilization crumble, and the humans who could have saved them were building something new and better. Something the Council was not invited to join. Back on Epsilon Base, Danny Price finally got the reactor stabilized. It had taken 6 weeks of round-the-clock work, but the system was running smoothly again. His alien coworkers threw him a party. They called him a hero. Danny did not feel like a hero. He felt tired. But when Voss, the Keltharian engineer, shook his hand and said he had saved thousands of lives, Danny figured maybe it had been worth it. He had given up his connection to humanity to help aliens who needed him. He had no idea if that made him a traitor or a saint. He suspected it made him neither. It just made him someone who tried to do the right thing when it mattered. That would have to be enough. The power vacuum created by humanity's departure grew wider every day. Species that had been kept in check by Council authority began testing boundaries. Old grudges that had been suppressed for centuries bubbled back tea. Oh, the surface. The Council peacekeeping forces tried to maintain order, but they were stretched impossibly thin. Most of their equipment had been human-made and without replacement parts or maintenance support. Their fleet was grounded. The galaxy was fracturing, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The Varaxian Empire saw opportunity in the chaos. They had always been one of the most aggressive Council members, but had been restrained by the threat of collective action against them. Now that threat was gone. The Council was too weak and divided to oppose them. Human forces were gone. The Varaxians began expanding into neutral zones and claiming worlds that had been disputed for generations. Their fleets moved with impunity, and any species that objected found Varaxian warships in their space, making not-so-subtle threats. The Orthan clans had been a problem for the Council for 200 years. They were raiders and pirates who struck at merchant convoys and remote outposts. The Council had managed to suppress them using peacekeepers armed with human weapons and human tactical support. Without that support, the peacekeepers were ineffective. The Orathons came back with a vengeance. They hit supply lines and communication stations. They attacked colonies that could not defend themselves. The Council issued strongly worded condemnations, but words did not stop plasma weapons. Lisa Hayes had been promoted to Admiral 3 months after humanity's withdrawal. She was 41 years old and had spent 20 years in the military, working her way up through merit and competence. Now she commanded the Terran Defense Fleet, which consisted of 63 warships ranging from destroyers to dreadnoughts. Her orders were simple: protect human interests, establish clear boundaries, show the galaxy that humanity was not to be threatened. She established what became known as the Terran Defense Perimeter. It was a clearly marked boundary that encompassed all human colonies and territorial claims. The perimeter was enforced by constant patrols and sensor networks. Any ship that crossed without permission was hailed and given one chance to turn back. If they refused, they were disabled and boarded. If they resisted, they were destroyed. The rules were simple and applied to everyone equally. The Varaxians decided to test those rules. They had never believed humans would actually fight to defend their claims. They thought the perimeter was a bluff. A Varaxian battle fleet crossed into human territory, heading toward a mining operation that produced rare metals. The fleet commander ignored hailing attempts and continued on course. Lisa's task force intercepted them at a location that would later be called Titan's Gate. The battle was not even close. The Varaxians still fought using outdated Council tactics. They relied on their shields and superior numbers. They expected a prolonged exchange of fire. Instead, Lisa's ships hit them with coordinated strikes, using weapons the Varaxians had never seen before. Relativistic kill vehicles punched through their shields, traveling at a fraction of light speed. Electronic warfare turned their own targeting systems against them. Drone swarms overwhelmed their point defenses. The Varaxian fleet was destroyed in 23 minutes. 8 ships reduced to expanding clouds of debris. Not a single human vessel took significant damage. Lisa broadcast the engagement footage on open channels. She wanted everyone to see what happened when you crossed the Terran defense perimeter. The message was clear. Humanity was not part of the Council anymore and was not bound by Council rules of engagement. They would defend themselves using whatever methods were necessary. Anyone who did not like that could stay out of human space. The battle became known as the Titan's Gate. Massacre, though Lisa always objected to that name. A massacre implied innocents being slaughtered. The Varaxians had been armed warships entering human territory with hostile intent. They had been warned. They had been given chances to turn back. They made their choice and paid for it. That was not a massacre. That was war. The Council convened another emergency session to condemn the battle. The vote failed. Too many species were quietly pleased to see the Varaxians taken down. Others were too afraid of humanity to vote against them. The Council was paralyzed by internal divisions and could not agree on anything anymore. They had no authority, and everyone knew it. Smaller species started reaching out to humanity independently. They were terrified of being caught between the expanding Varaxian Empire and the collapsing Council authority. They needed protection, and the Council could not provide it. Earth could. The first to make contact were the Selnari. The Selnari were an aquatic species from a water world called Sel. They were peaceful and had never developed military technology beyond basic defense systems. They had joined the Council seeking protection and trade opportunities. They had gotten trade, but protection had always been questionable. Now, with the Council falling apart, they were vulnerable. Varaxian scouts had been spotted near their system. The Selnari knew what that meant. Ambassador Selnakor arrived at Earth with a simple proposal. The Selnari would offer alliance and trade partnership in exchange for military protection. They had resources humanity needed, including rare biological compounds used in medical research. They had strategic locations that could serve as waypoints for human shipping. They offered everything they had because they had no other choice. Kelly White received Selnakor with respect. She listened to the proposal and asked what the Selnar expected from the alliance. Selnakor was honest. They expected humanity to defend them if the Varaxians attacked. They expected fair trade terms. They expected to be treated as equals rather than subordinates. Kelly said those terms were acceptable, but humanity had conditions of their own. The Terran Coalition had a charter. Species who joined agreed to certain principles. No aggression against member species, fair trade practices, mutual defense obligations, respect for sovereignty, democratic decision-making. Every member got an equal vote, regardless of size or power. If the Selnari could agree to those terms, they would be welcome. Selena-Core, read the charter carefully. It was everything the Council should have been, but never was. She signed immediately. The Selnar became the second species to join the Terran Coalition. Humanity was the first. Within weeks, others followed. The Krendin were a warrior culture that had served as mercenaries for various Council species. They respected strength and had watched humanity's military performance with great interest. Their leader, Krenvos, contacted Earth directly. He said the Krendin wanted to fight alongside worthy warriors. The Council had never been worthy. Humanity had proven themselves at Titan's Gate. The Krendin offered military partnership and asked only for fair compensation and mutual respect. Lisa met with Krenvos personally. She explained that the Terran Coalition did not hire mercenaries. They had allies who fought together for common cause. If the Krendin wanted to join, they would need to commit to defending all Coalition members, not just humanity. They would need to follow Coalition military doctrine. They would need to accept that not every problem could be solved with violence. Krenvos considered this. His people had always fought for the highest bidder. The idea of fighting for principles was strange to them. But he had seen how effective human tactics were. He had watched the Titan's Gate footage a dozen times. The Krendin could learn from humanity, and in return they could offer their own combat expertise. It was a fair trade. The Krendin joined the coalition. More species followed. The Yanari, who had voted with humanity at the Council, brought their advanced computing technology. The Drexel brought their agricultural knowledge. The Shen Compact brought their diplomatic networks. Each species added something to the coalition. Each species gained protection and partnership. The coalition grew from 2 members to 10, and then 2. 20-3. The Council watched helplessly as their member species defected. They tried to prevent it with threats and sanctions, but those threats rang hollow. What could they do? Their military was crippled. Their economy was collapsing. Their authority was gone. Species were leaving for a simple reason. The Terran Coalition offered something the Council never had. Real partnership based on mutual benefit. Lisa established coalition defense protocols. Ships from different species trained together. They learned each other's tactics and capabilities. They developed combined arms strategies that used everyone's strengths. A Krendan assault ship supported by Selnari, electronic warfare vessels and protected by human destroyers was a formidable force. The coalition military became more than the sum of its parts. The Varaxians tried to intimidate coalition members with shows of force. They sent battle groups to hover near coalition borders. Lisa responded by sending larger battle groups to escort them out. The Varaxians always left. They had learned at Titan's Gate that humans did not bluff. If they said they would fight, they meant it. The Varaxian Empire was powerful, but not powerful enough to face the entire coalition. Krellix watched his empire's influence shrink. The Varaxians had been a dominant power for 3,000 years. They had built their position through strength and intimidation. Now they were being outmaneuvered by humans who had been in space for less than a century. It was humiliating. His government sent increasingly desperate demands for him to do something. He had no answers. The galaxy was transforming. The old order, built on hierarchy, high-in-power politics, was dying. A new order built on cooperation and mutual respect was rising to replace it. The Council still existed, but only as a shadow of what it had been. Real power had shifted to the Terran Coalition, and everyone knew it. Lisa stood on the bridge of her flagship and looked at the star maps. Coalition territory was marked in blue. It had grown significantly in just 6 months. She thought about how far humanity had come. They had walked away from the Council expecting to stand alone. Instead, they had built something better. Something that proved civilization did not require dominance. It required partnership. The galaxy would never be the same, and for the first time in a long time, Lisa felt hopeful about the future. 1 year had passed since Jake Morrison walked out of the Council chamber, and the galaxy barely resembled what it had been. The Galactic Councils still met in their crystal halls on Nexus Prime, but their authority extended over less than half the species they once governed. The rest had either joined the Terran Coalition or declared independence. Some worlds had collapsed into chaos. Others thrived under new management. The old certainties were gone, and no one knew if they would ever return. Jake sat in a comfortable chair on Armstrong's station orbiting Earth and looked out at the planet below. He was writing his memoirs, though he doubted anyone would care to read them. History was being made every day now, and his part in it was already fading into the past. He was 53 years old and officially retired. The government had offered him positions in the new coalition administration, but he had declined. He had done his part. It was time for younger people to build the future. He thought about the day he announced humanity's withdrawal. He remembered Krellix laughing and saying humans would be back within a month. He remembered the certainty in the Council's collective voice that humanity needed them more than they needed humanity. He remembered walking out of that chamber knowing it was about to change everything and having no idea if it would work. It had worked. Not perfectly and not without cost, but it had worked. Humanity had not crawled back begging for readmission. They had built something new. The Terran Coalition represented everything the Council should have been. Fair, democratic, built on mutual respect rather than ancient hierarchies. 23 species working together because they chose to not, because they had no other option. Jake wondered if he had made the right choice. 38,000 people had died at New Seattle. The Council had done nothing. He had walked away in protest, and the galaxy had descended into chaos. Millions more had suffered in the economic collapse that followed. Thousands had died in the conflicts that erupted when council authority crumbled. Were those deaths on his conscience? Should he have found another way? He decided that no other way existed. The council had been given chances to reform, decades of chances. They had chosen to protect the powerful at the expense of everyone else. Sometimes the only way to build something better was to walk away from something broken. The chaos that followed was not his fault. It was the inevitable result of a system that had been failing for centuries. His terminal chimed with a news alert. The council was making another offer. Jake read it with mild interest. They were offering humanity a permanent seat with full veto power over council decisions, control over all military operations, guaranteed favorable trade terms for the next century, technology sharing agreements. It was everything they should have offered 20 years ago. President Helen Carter's response was already posted. She had declined politely, but firmly. The statement explained that humanity had moved beyond the council model. The Terran coalition represented a better way forward. Any species that wished to join was welcome, but the coalition would not subordinate itself to council authority. The door was closed and would remain closed. Jake smiled. Helen had been president during the entire crisis, and she had handled it perfectly. She had kept humanity united when things got difficult. She had overseen the formation of the coalition. She had turned what could have been a disaster into humanity's finest moment. History would remember her kindly. Across the solar system, Captain Ryan Cole stood on the bridge of the UHNS Valiant. The ship was humanity's newest dreadnought. 600 meters of armor and weapons representing the cutting edge of human military technology. Ryan had been given command 3 months ago, and he was still getting used to the responsibility. The Valiant was flagship of the Third Coalition Fleet, which included ships from 7 different species. His communications officer called out an incoming distress signal. Ryan checked the source and felt his stomach tighten. It was coming from a council world called Praxis. The planet was under attack by raiders. Heavy casualties reported. Orbital defenses destroyed. Ground forces unable to hold. The nearest council peacekeeping fleet was 6 days away. The nearest coalition fleet was Ryan's, and they could be there. In 8 hours, Ryan called a meeting with his command staff. They gathered in the briefing room, and he laid out the situation. Praxis was a council world, not a coalition member, not a human ally, just another species that had voted to do nothing when humans needed help. The question was simple. Did they respond to the distress call? His tactical officer pointed out that they had no obligation to help. Praxis had made their choice when they stayed with the council. His medical officer said that innocent people were dying, and that was all that mattered. His engineering chief said the coalition was supposed to be better than the council, and this was a chance to prove it. The debate went back and forth for 10 minutes. Ryan listened to all of them, and then made his decision. They would respond. Not because they owed the council anything, but because it was the right thing to do. The coalition stood for protecting those who could not protect themselves. That principle did not change based on politics. The fleet jumped 2 faster than light travel and emerged in the Praxis system 8 hours later. The planet was under siege by an Orathon raiding fleet. 12 ships armed with weapons stolen from abandoned council armories. They were bombarding population centers and preparing to land ground forces. The local defense force was in ruins. Ryan did not bother with warnings or negotiations. The Orathons were raiders attacking civilians. They had made their choice. The Valiant and its escort ships opened fire. The battle was over in minutes. Orathon ships were designed for hitting soft targets, not fighting military vessels. They scattered and tried to run. Only 3 escaped. The rest were destroyed. Ryan established orbit over Praxis and sent shuttles to deliver medical supplies and emergency aid. The local government was stunned. They asked why humans had come to help. Ryan's response was simple. People were in danger, and the coalition had the ability to help. That was reason enough. The footage of the rescue spread across the galaxy. Council worlds that had viewed humanity as reckless warmongers saw something different. They saw humans risking themselves to save people they had no obligation to save. They saw the coalition living up to its principles, even when it would have been easier to do nothing. More species started reaching out. Not to join the coalition necessarily, but to establish diplomatic relations, to open trade negotiations, to ask if defense pacts might be possible. The coalition considered each request carefully. They were not interested in expanding just for the sake of expanding. They wanted partners who shared their values. The council held yet another emergency session. This one was different from the others. There was no anger or condemnation, just exhaustion and acceptance. They had lost. The council would continue to exist because some species still believed in it, but it would never again be the dominant force in galactic politics. That era was over. Thor and Ian ran calculations on the council's long-term viability. The numbers were not encouraging. Without major reforms, the council would continue losing members until only the founding species remained. Even some of them were reconsidering their positions. The Keltharians had opened formal talks with the coalition. The Pollux were considering it. If the council lost its founding members, it would cease to exist entirely. She presented her findings to the council leadership. They received the report in silence. No one had solutions. The problems were too deep and too old. The council had been built on assumptions that no longer held true. Power did not flow from tradition or ancient agreements. It flowed from legitimacy and service. The council had neither anymore. Jake finished writing the final chapter of his memoir. He ended it with a reflection on what humanity had accomplished. They had left the council and chaos had followed. But from that chaos came opportunity. The chance to build something better. The chance to prove that civilization did not require hierarchy. It required partnership and mutual respect, and the willingness to defend what was right, even when it was difficult. He saved the file and looked out at Earth. Somewhere down their children were being born who would never know a time when humanity was part of the Galactic Council. They would grow up in the Terran Coalition, taking for granted the freedoms and partnerships that his generation had fought for. That was how it should be. Each generation built on what came before. Ryan Cole received new orders. The coalition was establishing a rapid response force to deal with situations like Praxis. Ship S that could move quickly to provide aid or protection anywhere in coalition space or beyond. The Valiant would be part of that force. Ryan accepted the assignment gladly. It was exactly the kind of work he had joined the military to do. He thought about the galaxy they were building. It was not perfect. There were still conflicts and problems. The Varaxian Empire was still dangerous. Raiders still attacked vulnerable targets. Economic inequality still existed. But things were better than they had been. The coalition gave species a real choice. Partnership over domination. Cooperation over exploitation. The old galaxy had been built on power. The new galaxy was being built on principle. That was worth fighting for. Worth sacrificing for. Worth everything humanity had given up when Jake Morrison walked out of the council chamber 1 year ago. The galaxy had changed, and it would keep changing. But the direction was clear. Forward, together. Building something that future generations would be proud of. That was humanity's gift to the stars. Not technology or weapons or wealth, but the simple idea that everyone deserved respect, and that civilization meant lifting each other up rather than holding each other down. Jake closed his memoir and smiled. Whatever came next, the galaxy would face it together. Not under the council's hierarchy, but as true partners. That was Pandemonium worth celebrating.